I think I started using social media partly because I wasn't actually sure what it was about, but I had heard that other people were using it, particularly people in my field, and so I thought if there's things going on there that I'm not part of, it makes sense to find out what it is about. So that was the initial motivation, but I think from now I've realised that it's a really easy way to keep in touch with what other people are doing without necessarily tracking publication records all the time. I use LinkedIn, ResearchGate and academia.edu as, I guess they're almost, they're a way that I can sort of put up papers and track researchers that I'm interested in without doing very much on them. So I can sort of have my profile there and in a sense they take care of themselves. You know, you update publications, but you can start to interact very naturally with other people without having to do a lot of work, without having to look up someone's details and send them an email and say, I really like your work. You can simply hit follow, or you can say, send me that paper. So it's a much more organic way of interacting, I think. I also use The Conversation. I've published a couple of articles there as a way of distributing information to, I guess, to the lay public, which is something that we don't get to do very much as academics. We're usually writing technical journal articles, and I comment on articles there as well, so it's a good way to engage with what other people are doing. I've started using Facebook a little bit to interact with researchers that I'm also friends with. It just happens that we all of a sudden get excited by something academic and start to discuss it on Facebook, but I try as much as possible to keep my sort of natural curiosity as a researcher within Facebook, but my professional persona separate from Facebook. So I think there's a few opportunities that have arisen from social media, and this is coming from someone who's fairly, I guess, almost lazy about the way I use it, but just by keeping a profile active and by contributing a couple of articles now and then to things like The Conversation, there's these really good opportunities to share your research, and I think that's one of the biggest benefits out there. I mean, the general public use social media, they use these interactive platforms, they don't read journal articles, and a lot of times just journal articles are behind a paywall anyway. So this is a way that we can actually share what we're doing, and I think given that we're funded by the public, that's actually really important. I think it's really nice that we can share what we're doing, discuss with others, and there's an added element to that which I think really enhances your research work, which is that you then have to think about, okay, why is this important? Sometimes if it's something like curing cancer, the answer is obvious, but sometimes if it's something a little bit more theoretical, you have to think about what are the implications, why should we care about this? And I think if you know what you're doing, you should be able to answer that question. So thinking through that is good for your research program itself, I think. I don't think many of my colleagues are using a large number of social media platforms, but I think most academics would be engaging in social media in some way, whether that's reading The Conversation or maintaining a LinkedIn profile. I think most people have some sort of engagement, but I think we're still in that really early stage where we're not quite sure what kind of engagement is most beneficial and how we can best direct our efforts. So I think often people are doing the same thing that I am, which is dabbling here and there and using those systems that seem to be most easy, but really only discovering the functionality along the way. I think there are a few risks to using social media. I think one thing is being very careful about how you differentiate your social media profile versus your professional or academic social media profile, and I think that's important for a number of reasons. Firstly, because you just need to have a life yourself that's sort of distinct from what you do in your workplace. But secondly, because you need to be able to express opinions differently in different forums. And in a professional context, you're not only representing yourself, but you're also representing your university. So I think that's important to understand those differences and to set up different profiles if you need to, or just be careful about what you put in which media. Sort of, I guess, have a personal strategy for how you manage those competing demands. I actually think that using social media probably has influenced the way in which I network face-to-face, and this is coming from somebody I've always been very reluctant to network face-to-face. I've always been the person standing in the corner sort of looking around going, oh, this is awkward, what do I do? But I've actually, one thing that's been really heartening is having a couple of researchers in my field who I respect a lot sort of hit follow on one of those media platforms, and it's something very minor, but all of a sudden you feel like a celebrity, they're following me. And I think by having that little introduction, even though it's such a minor thing, I'd now feel comfortable going up to them at a conference and saying, you know, hi, I know we've actually interacted a little bit online, I'd love to chat to you a little bit more about the work that you're doing, that sort of thing. So I think it provides an easier pathway into that face-to-face networking. Often they're things that will come around somehow, they'll be circulated somehow. And so social media is one way in which that happens. Somebody might post something on ResearchGate, for example, and I think you get a little pop-up that says this person's published this, so, oh, that looks great, I'll go and look at that. But otherwise it might be something that somebody sends around in an email chain and says, I think this would be really interesting for this particular group. So I think more and more it's not that we necessarily always go and do a big literature search. Often that information's starting to come to us if we've got things set up in the right way. So it's really about, I guess, setting up an environment that allows information to come to you and that lets you filter what you want coming to you. And often it sort of just pops up. So I think that's another reason actually to be engaged in these sorts of tools, because more and more of people are using information just coming to them through these systems. Then if you're not part of that, your information doesn't get distributed as easily. Yeah. By using social media as a tool, not only am I able to share information with others and sort of receive the information that they're sharing, but you also get a lot of metrics that you can use. So you get told your profile count, you get told how many people have downloaded your article in the last week and what countries they come from. So I guess there's a lot of extra information that you get from engaging in these sorts of sites that you wouldn't otherwise have, and you can use that information when you go for a grant application or when you go for a promotion application. So it's not necessarily that you'd use it in your day-to-day life. I think you use the information that's shared in your day-to-day life, but I think that the metrics that get produced alongside that just provides this nice extra source of information that you can combine with things like teaching scores to present yourself in the best light possible. Using social media does enhance your insider status because, the way that we conduct research, we're often looking for, I guess, the next advance. But more than that, these advances sit within this kind of field of interested researchers who are kind of building research together, and that's always collaborative, it's always building on top of what other people do. And so being, I guess, part of this network of people who are sharing ideas, and often these ideas aren't necessarily at publication stage yet, but there might simply be a question thrown out, does anybody know how this is done? Then you're able to engage in that, I guess, the steps that come before the discovery that comes at the end of a research project. So you're actually able to participate in the whole process. I think by participating in that whole process, it's a lot more fun when you do it with other people and you can network across different oceans and that sort of thing. But you also start to develop collaborations and start to understand a bit more about what other people are about. Big researchers in your area, it's not so much about just consuming the findings that they generate, but it's about actually sharing a dialogue that leads to new discoveries. That used to be something that you could really only do within your own university when you're talking face to face, but you can actually start to do that much more easily now, simply by jumping on the computer. And I think as the process of doing that, you become an insider. People start to know who you are and they start to know what you can contribute. So in my case, they might know that I'm in child memory, but also with an education bent. I'm interested in how children learn and what the emotional aspects of that learning are. And so if somebody sort of wants to look at memory from an adult perspective, then I've got something to offer them and they've got something to offer me. So I think the biggest piece of advice is that it's really easy to do. I think you can put in as much or as little effort as you want, but simply by being part of it and by having a profile up there and by putting your publications up there and looking at the questions that other people generate, that in itself, it's so quick and easy to do, but that already makes you part of this community, and it already means that you're starting to share ideas with others, you're starting to get your own profile out there, you're starting to shape your own research a little bit more sophisticatedly than you might do otherwise. You can do that much better than I'm doing probably by engaging with these tools more. But I think the excuse that you might have, that it's going to take too much time and I just don't have time because there's too much else going on, it saves you so much more time than it costs. So I think it's really worth even just dabbling, seeing what it can do for you, and then starting to choose the tools that you think are most worthwhile for you.